It's about us showing up in relationship to what's going on in a way that brings God's presence into our thoughts and feelings and experiences and life so that we can see these things and circumstances through divine mind, through the eyes of God, the way in which perhaps Jesus might see them in terms of his showing up in his life. Jesus said, he said, "Be ye perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." Now that always has been one of the most difficult passages that I've had to kind of struggle with in my life, because it's like he's saying, well, you know, this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be perfect. You're supposed to achieve perfection in your life because your Father in heaven is perfect. And so I was thinking about that, and I was thinking, well, maybe what he was really saying, maybe if you say it differently, maybe you should say it, be ye perfect. You know how it's like, be ye perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. You are already perfect. You are perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now that's more of an affirmation, is it not? It's like we are affirming our perfection. And we're not saying that we do things perfectly. We are saying that we already were created perfectly. That God doesn't create something that's not perfect. Because God creates what needs to be created in order to bring whatever it is that's needed into the world. So you wouldn't be in the world if you weren't needed. If you weren't created for some perfect reason, you wouldn't be here. Because you're not here because of some random event that occurred. You are here because the consciousness of Spirit is seeking to express itself in the world through you as the energy and the love and the gift of God to this planet. And it's not like to walk down the street and say, I'm this perfect gift of God. That's not what we're trying to say. What we're saying is that we're acknowledging the consciousness of our innate spiritual perfection. That our bodies may not seem perfect, that our bodies may not function how we might think that they should function, but in spirit we have been created perfectly as the Spirit of God in human expression. And so we have these physical containers that we call our bodies are the containers through which we interact and relate in this world on this planet. And so it allows us, when we say that, to start thinking like God would think. Because we can say, how would Spirit, how would God, how would Jesus think in this circumstance or this situation? You know, if you were created as a can opener, that you were a sentient can opener, right? That you were aware of yourself as a can opener, what would be perfection? That you could perfectly open a can, right? Because you would know that you're a can opener. You would know that you were created for that purpose, and therefore you were perfect because you could perfectly open a can. And even a bad can opener is better than no can opener, right? Okay. I mean, seriously. So you were created perfectly as a can opener. So I want you to kind of sit for a moment. Just close your eyes for a second and just sit for a moment and just get the feeling of what it means to be perfect. Right now. Just sense that I am perfect right now. There's nothing that I need to do to be any more perfect than I already am in this moment. Just feel it. Absorb it. Experience it. And appreciate it. Appreciate that everything that I need is within me right now. Everything that has been created is within me right now. Everything that I am to do is within me right now. Every thought, passion, word, deed, experience, energy field, it's all there. I am the perfect creation of God to do what it is that I have come here to do. I am perfect, even as my Father in heaven is perfect. Let's say that. I am perfect, even as my Father in heaven is perfect. Now, where our struggle comes in is not in the recognition of our perfection, it is in doing perfection. You see, that's where we sort of, I think, flip into that consciousness that we struggle with, is that we rather than acknowledging our perfection, it's when it comes into creating something, it's got to be perfect. And that's where the perfectionist consciousness shows up. And so perfectionism is about how good we do something, okay, rather than that. So think about the Jewish community. The Jewish community, especially back in Jesus' day, had in the Torah, there was over 600, I think the number is 663, but I'm not exactly sure. But they had over 600 things in the law that they were supposed to do perfectly every day or in a given day in order to please God. Okay? That was the intention. So out of the Jewish law, that they had to do those things. Now it came out of the original sin idea, and that's what they had to do to make up for what had happened. And if they made up for what had happened through the things that they did, God would be pleased, and therefore they would have a perfect day. And I think the result was that they would ascend, or whatever the God would take them home, or whatever the dynamic was. Well, we know that it was impossible to do all 660-some things a day perfectly, right? But that's the consciousness that sort of carries forward, that we have to do those things. We have to please God rather than realizing that we've already pleased God. We've already pleased God, or we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be here if we hadn't already pleased God. That's why we're here. And so our job is not to please something else, it's rather to express that innate sense of goodness and spiritual understanding that is within us into our life, and to do what is ours that we have come here to do. Michael Beckwith says that there really was only one original sin. He said that original sin really is original ignorance. He said the belief that we are separate somehow from the whole. He says that when we remove the debris of original ignorance from our pristine Eden consciousness of oneness, of wholeness, we experience in that moment our inner riches. We experience who it is that we really are. And that original sin really was the belief in separation, and we are on the journey back to our oneness. That is really what we are doing. That's what it's about. That's what our experience is. And to the extent that we are able to achieve that in our life, to the extent that we're able to stand in the moment and say, what's going on right now in this experience? How can I show up in this experience as the perfect expression of God that I already am? How can I think about this, see this situation? How can I look at this through the eyes of God? And how can I be a transforming presence in this moment, not only for my life, but for the life of those who are around me? How can I have a sense of humor? How can I show up with compassion? How can I really see the world as we are capable of seeing it, and in doing so, transform that moment and that experience and the lives of those who are around me, not because that's what I'm trying to do, but because that's the intention of God for me to show up in that way. Do you see the distinction? I'm not trying to do something, I'm trying to be something. And there's a huge difference, because do something means that we have to somehow, I did this, I did that. We measure results. But to be something means that we are simply showing up as we are intended to show up. And the results take care of themselves. We don't start judging the things around us. And as soon as we see ourselves judging the parade, which means that we're separating ourselves from the experience, and we recognize what it is that we're doing, we can stop judging and step back into the reality and the experience and the presence and the understanding of who it is that we are. Michael Beckwith says that a perfectionist must outstrip the competition and satisfy the ego. A person who functions at a standard of excellence reflects his or her personal best while satisfying the heart. Those seeking perfection push others aside for the sake of personal gain. Those who strive for excellence seek success for others as well as themselves.